Tonight, the White House doubles down.
The February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
The sharp divide with days to go.
There cannot be tariff without consequences.
And new details about Ottawa's plan to help Canadian workers and businesses. How rock barriers are being used to prevent illegal border crossings, like this one caught on camera. Plus, what a cancer patient has to say after a crowded hospital moves her to a storage room.
I would like that storage room to be strictly a storage room.
Also, W5 investigates a romance scammer who deceived multiple women for years. We'll tell you how much they lost.
It was like soul crushing.
And the snowbirds coming home.
Until recently, it was cheaper to be there.
Why more Canadians are selling in the sunshine.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening. The White House sent an unequivocally strong signal today that the U.S. president plans to follow through on his punishing tariffs on Canada on Saturday, which would be a massive and crippling hit to Canadian businesses. CTV's senior political correspondent Michael Couture on Ottawa's plan to blunt the blow and how long it could take to kick in.
The February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
The White House reaffirmed in 4 days, 25% tariffs could be applied to all Canadian goods going into the U.S. That's despite the outreach and warnings from politicians on this side of the border that Americans will also feel the pain.
There cannot be tariff without consequences. There cannot be tariffs without impact. And there cannot be tariffs with a higher cost for U.S. consumers.
If those warnings don't work, the federal government is preparing counter tariffs plus a stimulus package to help businesses and Canadians. No specific programs have been designed, but sources tell CTV News they could reach pandemic levels. The plan doesn't need to launch as soon as tariffs are levied on Canadian products. Instead, it will address the economic impacts as they become apparent.
We're going to see an unprecedented attack to our families, to our businesses, to our communities.
Other premiers appear to be on board, as long as whatever money collected from counter tariffs goes to those who need it most.
That they treat this as seriously as they did the COVID response. And for our part here in British Columbia, that we will fill in the gaps to make sure that British Columbians are protected.
In an interview on Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, former finance minister and current leadership contender Chrystia Freeland said Canada needs to publish a list of American products we could slap with counter tariffs to get President Trump's attention.
I believe that he doesn't care that much if Canadian politicians are jumping around, banging our fists on the table, etc., but he cares about Americans.
Now, any stimulus package would have to be passed through Parliament, which is prorogued until March 24th. While opposition parties have promised to bring down the government, today the NDP left the door open to supporting the Liberals in order to pass relief measures. Omar?
All right, Mike, thanks. A new legal setback for the U.S. president tonight as a judge hit pause on his plans to freeze federal funding. The issue dominating the first White House briefing as Trump's new press secretary, the youngest in history at 27, made news of her own. Here's CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbin.
How are we?
Making her debut, the president's new White House secretary promised to tell reporters the truth, beginning with those mystery drones over New Jersey. Donald Trump suggested the Biden administration was hiding something. The truth, it seems, was already out there.
The drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research.
No conspiracy here as the Trump administration ramped up crackdowns on illegal immigration, hoping to hit 3 cities each week. Trump's new Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem posting video of a suspected high-ranking gang member in New York being arrested, calling them dirtbags. The Trump administration says it sees no difference between violent criminals and undocumented migrants being swept up too.
And if you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal. And so therefore, you are subject to deportation.
The new White House defending another sweeping action by the president, a memo freezing all federal financial assistance, including foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, diversity, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal, sparking chaos and confusion.
It means no more funding for illegal DEI programs. It means no more funding for transgenderism and wokeness across our federal bureaucracy.
A U.S. judge blocked Trump's order at least until Monday. Another setback? Carolyn Kennedy urged senators to reject Trump's pick for health secretary, her own cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., calling him a predator addicted to power.
Bobby preys on the desperation of parents of sick children, vaccinating his own kids while building a following hypocritically discouraging other parents from vaccinating theirs.
All this as the White House and President Trump continues to test the limits of his presidential power. Joy Malvin, CTV News, Washington.
Canada is beefing up border security to appease the U.S. president, investing more than $1 billion to clamp down on illegal crossings using high-tech surveillance with planes and drones. But as CTV's Andrew Johnson reports, American authorities are using a much lower-tech technique along part of BC's border with Washington.
3 people dressed in black hastily lay down planks ahead of a black pickup. Then one of them hops back in and hits the gas, smashing their way into Canada yesterday illegally.
I've never seen a vehicle try and get across before.
RCMP later arrested 5 people from Romania.
U.S. Border Patrol says illegal crossings in this area are on the rise, so they're installing more of these boulders as well as concrete barriers to try to keep people in cars from charging across the line.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection says in a statement they've been strategically installed in high traffic areas to deter unauthorized vehicle crossings and mitigate risks to local communities. These reinforcements are part of a broader strategy to address emerging security challenges along the northern border.
The driver carjacked the vehicle, is armed with a knife.
Security challenges like this. A wild scene at the nearby Peace Arch crossing just last month. The driver of a stolen pickup truck blew through the border into the U.S. and led police on a chase down the interstate highway. But people living along the Canadian side of the border say they noticed beefed up security before that.
In the last 2 or 3 months, there's definitely been a larger presence of the trucks on the American side for sure.
There's definitely increased presence of them trying to be behave. I don't know.
This is
scare us.
On Monday, the Canada Border Services Agency shared it will no longer allow hikers to enter the country on this popular trail between BC and the U.S. A Washington state immigration lawyer believes we are seeing the Trump effect.
Here we are with the new Trump administration, and we're already seeing on both sides of the border barriers going up.
Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Surrey, BC.
One of the hitmen who killed a former Air India bombing suspect has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 20 years. Tanner Fox pleaded guilty to second-degree murder last October in the death of Rapudaman Singh Malik 3 years ago. In 2005, the Sikh businessman was acquitted of charges related to the Air India bombing that killed more than 300 people in 1985. Fox's accomplice, Jose Lopez, also pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He is due back in court next Thursday. The final report in the public inquiry on foreign interference is revealing no evidence of, quote, traitors, but is exposing what the commissioner is calling an existential threat to democracy. CTV's Judy Trin tells us what it is.
Our democratic institutions have remained robust.
Justice Marie-Josée Hogue says she found no proof of parliamentarians conspiring with foreign states.
Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament. The evidence does not show any MPs plotting with foreign states against Canada's interests.
Hogue contradicted an earlier National Security Committee report which revealed semi-witting and witting participants. The public safety minister, who was the former chair of that committee, stands by their findings.
She's had the benefit of perhaps additional information, as she says in her own review,
information that was not brought to our attention at the time, but I don't think there's much daylight here at all.
Hogue did say the behavior of some politicians was unethical, that there were problematic relationships with diplomats and officials who didn't sound the alarm sooner.
That's the overall theme of the report, that up until recently, everybody involved has grossly underestimated this problem and not done enough with information passing along and dealing with it.
Hogue reviewed several incidents of attempted foreign interference, including allegations that surfaced in Liberal MP Han Dong's nomination race about busloads of international students brought in to cast ballots. Hogue recommends allowing Elections Canada to scrutinize the nomination processes of political parties and limiting voting to citizens and permanent residents. While some actions require changing laws, others the government can do now.
Improving the ability of parliamentarians to understand the threat. And she's talking about, let's create a guide for them, let's make sure they have proper training, let's make sure they get the intelligence that they need to have.
There are 51 recommendations in this report, but the biggest challenges are yet to come. Hogue says disinformation is the greatest threat to democracy, and the government has limited tools to counter it. Omar.
All right, Judy, thank you. Ontario's Lieutenant Governor has agreed to the Premier's request to dissolve the legislature, triggering a snap election for February 27th. Doug Ford says it's all about the looming tariff threat across the border.
This is going to be a battle for the next 4 years, and I want to make sure that I have a strong mandate to outlast President Trump.
Ford says the tariffs threaten as many as 500,000 jobs in his province, but opposition leaders accuse him of adding to the chaos and uncertainty.
Doug Ford is calling this snap election because he's thinking that nobody's going to be paying attention in the middle of winter. I feel like people are suffering out there.
Ford is looking for a third consecutive majority mandate in the election, which was previously scheduled for June of next year. And access to health care could be a significant campaign issue in that election. Overstretched hospitals, a major concern nationwide. Tonight, CTV's Kathy Lee brings us the story of a cancer patient in Alberta who was transferred to a storage space for 24 hours and where she says she struggled to find even the basics.
Over there that I have to follow.
Orders from the doctor includes pain medication to help Rose Roll manage as she battles cancer in her bone marrow.
It affects my immune system. I get a lot of bone pain with it.
Her suffering magnified at the Chinook Regional Hospital in Lethbridge, where she was undergoing treatment and was moved at the tail end of her week-long stay.
They said, well, a much sicker person needs my room and that I would be going to a storage room.
This was the room, half filled with hospital supplies. Roll says it was dirty. She didn't have her own sink, shower, or toilet. She needed to find a clean bed sheet and at one point had to buy water.
I definitely felt forgotten. I was really sad. I felt like inmates got treated better. I felt really demoralized.
A patient advocacy group says Roll's experience speaks to a wider problem with the healthcare system, not just in Alberta, but countrywide.
It's a hangover from the pandemic. It's something that continues across the country, and I don't think governments have done enough to address this ongoing problem.
Alberta Health Services says it apologizes for what happened, saying the hospital is currently experiencing high patient demand and the unit Roll was in is under a respiratory outbreak, and that they have removed the shelving unit and cleaned the room. Roll says cleaning is not enough.
I would like that storage room to be strictly a storage room and for them to never put a patient in there again.
Not just for the sake of other patients, but in the event she needs to return for cancer treatment in the future. Kathy Lee, CTV News, Calgary.
Coming up, breaking hearts and bank accounts.
Never thought a scam would be someone who's living in my house and telling me that they loved me.
The cheat preying on women looking for love. We have a major romance scam to tell you about tonight involving one man dating and deceiving more than a dozen women, taking tens of thousands of dollars. The charismatic culprit meeting most of his victims online. W5's John Woodward with part one of his investigation.
Girls in love never gave back diamond rings.
He was boisterous, he was charming. Nikki McPhee knew him as Johnny Myers, and he seemed like relationship material.
Wish every boat had a swing.
He comes off caring, he's very charismatic, he was a good singer, he was always singing country songs. We had a really good time together, and I guess that got me to lower my guard.
And with her guard down, Johnny approached her with an investment opportunity at a business in Ontario. It didn't work out.
How much money did you lose?
$30,000.
Around the same time, Ange Medill was dating him too. She says he offered to sell her motorcycle, but she never saw the money.
Like once you stop giving him money, then the cracks start opening, the red flags start appearing.
He sold that motorcycle to Naomi Wolf and pocketed most of the money.
8 months, I was with a man who I thought was John Myers.
And he asked Amy Todd for $60,000 for a horse business that turned out to belong to another woman. She never got her money back.
I actually almost lost my house. I still owe $20,000.
These women didn't know it then, but all of these boyfriends were one and the same. 39-year-old John Mulder, who changed his name and his story multiple times as he met women across Ontario. Medill found his picture on this website, Are We Dating the Same Man?, with comments from more than 100 women. Many said they met him on online dating services.
So the night I discovered him on the website, it was like soul crushing. It was almost like I was floating in air, like I couldn't breathe.
She called the police. She learned he had been charged before, and soon scattered criminal cases from across southern Ontario were pulled together at this court just outside Toronto. Mulder pleaded guilty to counts related to 13 women across southern Ontario, fraudulently obtaining more than $160,000 and 2 vehicles over 2 years. The sentence, 8 years in prison. He told the court, "What I've done was absolutely terrible. I hurt a lot of people. I've been at this game a long time." The Crown said he had a criminal history of 79 convictions, about half for fraud, half for failing to appear or breaching, a handful for assault. His lawyer telling the court the 39-year-old was addicted to money. The judge, Jill Cameron, said the only reasonable conclusion is greed, warning him you will spend the rest of your life in jail in bits and pieces if you don't stop. Romance scams are on the rise in Canada, from $52 million in 2023 to $58 million in 2024. The experience a wake-up call for McPhee.
And what kind of impact did this scam have on you?
I thought of scams as someone who's going to call your grandparents saying your grandkid's in jail, or someone who's going to be pretending to collect your taxes. I never thought a scam would be someone who's living in my house and telling me that they loved me.
She wishes the justice system had cracked down on Mulder before she met him, and is asking women to be skeptical of demands for money from those they meet online.
And in part 2 tomorrow night, John tells us how the scam continued from prison. Still ahead, snowbirds take flight, why Canadians are suddenly selling their homes in Florida. Canadian snowbirds have long been sold on the idea of Florida as their home away from home during the winter months, but now they're scrambling to sell. CTV's Geneviève Beauchemin breaks down the reasons why.
The Sunshine State has drawn snowbirds to its beaches for decades. But along with unusual weather this month, that is snow last week, the tide seems to have turned. A hike in listings tells the story.
There's a lot of Canadians selling, so I do have way more listings that I'm used to.
There's been talk of boycotting everything USA in the wake of Trump's election. But the reasons for the sell-off seems to be far less political, much more financial.
You walk the beach, you bicycle, you can go play sports.
Ontario's Mike Dunlop owns a condo in Cape Canaveral. Here are some of his snapshots of the spots he loves. But costs for snowbirds like himself, with the Canadian dollar at less than 70 cents to the US dollar, and higher condo fees are now adding up.
Until recently, it was cheaper to be there. The price of commodities was lower in the grocery stores, things like that. Eating out was cheaper than back at home. But that's risen, and the Canadian dollar's gone down.
He's considering when he too might put up a for sale sign. But some longtime real estate brokers working with Canadian snowbirds say this is a wave that will pass.
Be
people adjust. Someone will come down. If they go to a restaurant 4 or 5 times a week, I mean, maybe they'll chop it down to 2 times a week. I think people will still come. It's not like people are scratching off Florida.
And he says Canadians feel at home in the United States, particularly in Florida, regardless of politics. Of course, it's a home that's a lot warmer these days. Geneviève Beauchemin, CTV News, Montreal.
And changes are coming to Google Maps after an order by Donald Trump to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. It will now be listed as the Gulf of America when the U.S. government changes its official listing. Trump also ordered a name change for North America's highest mountain, and Google said it will also comply with that, reverting to Mount McKinley to identify the peak known as Denali since 2015, when President Barack Obama changed it as a symbolic gesture to Alaska's indigenous people. The Google Maps changes apply to U.S. users only. Still ahead, taking a bite out of pet selling scams. A Canadian's planned to put a leash on an unregulated industry. A new Canadian tech tool is almost ready to be unleashed to connect breeders with prospective dog buyers. Here's CTV's Garrett Barry on how it helps fend off scammers ready to pounce.
At just 2 weeks old, little Beanie spends most of her time with her eyes closed. Still, it won't be long before this litter is off to new families.
We start to see personality come between 4 and 6 weeks, and it's pretty set by about 7.
As a small-scale breeder, Sherry Morris takes a whole lot of pride in her animals, doing everything she can to ensure they go to a well-matched home.
What we hope is that we have a family that when you come and talk and you spend a half an hour or an hour seeing the puppies and talking to me, that you have a feel-good feeling.
Others in the pet industry put money way ahead of welfare. Puppy mills, where female dogs are bred too often, still vex advocates across the country. And full-blown scams are costing Canadians a total of almost $1 million every year, according to the latest data from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. James Gray is building a plan to combat some of that. He's getting ready to launch a web app matching buyers and sellers and providing each side with way more information.
Understand, yes, this person does these health tests, they're reputable.
One key feature would allow money from a buyer to be held by the payment processor, so the seller knows for sure that it's there, but the money would only actually be finally sent when both parties are satisfied with the transaction.
So there's individuals that pretend to be fake breeders, and they ask for a deposit. You pay the deposit, and then all of a sudden they disappear.
Morris is working with 2 similar platforms. She says it's early, but they show promise in making transactions more transparent. Here at CTV News, St. John's.
And that's a snapshot of this Tuesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night, and see you tomorrow.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.